Meeting number 22 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on the Status of Women. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the standing orders. I'd like to make a few comments for the benefit of members and witnesses here today. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. And for those that are participating by Zoom, you'll click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you're not speaking. For interpretation, if you look at the bottom of your screen, you can pick floor, English, or French to get the translation you would like. And if you wish to speak, raise your hand. And all comments should be addressed through the chair. So thanks for the cooperation on that. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082, the motion adopted by the committee on Monday, September 15th, 2025, the committee will resume its study of anti-feminist ideology. Now, before we welcome our witnesses, I'd like to provide a trigger warning. We'll be discussing themes and experiences related to anti-feminist ideology. This may be triggering to viewers with similar experiences. If any participants feel distressed or need help, please advise the clerk. And for all witnesses and members of Parliament, it's important to recognize that these are difficult discussions, and so let's be compassionate in our conversations. Now let's welcome our witnesses.
As an individual, Tristan Boursier, Doctor of Political Science. From Les Trois Sexes, Mylène de Repentigny-Corbet, Executive Director.
From the Ontario Coalition of Rape Crisis Centres, Dina Haddish, Members Coordinator. Welcome. Nous allons commencer par les déclarations d'ouverture des témoins.
We will now move on to witness opening remarks. Mr. Boursier, you have the floor. 5 minutes. Hello, Madam Chair, honorable committee members. Thank you for inviting me to appear today to share my expertise as part of this important study on anti-feminism. Anti-feminism can be viewed as a counter-movement. To that end, in that sense, it is opposed to feminism and gender equality writ large. Contrary to popular beliefs, anti-feminism is not simply sexist attitudes or run-of-the-mill misogyny. It is, principally, a political vision of the world based on one central idea. Inequality between men and women is not just natural, but desirable. As such, anti-feminism represents a complete ideology aimed at challenging, slowing, or reversing advancements in equality. It is important to note that anti-feminism is not a new phenomenon. Historians like Christine Bard have shown that it has been around for over a century. However, my research does not focus on historical forms of anti-feminism, but rather on its contemporary manifestations, especially in digital spaces. My research is mostly focused on Quebec and France. However, in a globalized digital world, it is impossible to ignore the influence of the United States, where online anti-feminism is especially structured, visible, and economically powerful. Discourse gets circulated, translated, adapted, and brought across national borders with great ease. More specifically, I am interested in key actors in this ecosystem, influencers. These are individuals whose main activities consist of producing and spreading digital anti-feminist content, for example, videos, podcasts, social media posts. These actors are not on the margins. They sometimes have large communities of followers and develop true economic models based on the attention economy. The view of the world being shared is often masculist. Masculism can be seen as a subcategory of anti-feminism. It is based on the idea that feminists have gone too far, leading to a purported crisis of masculinity. According to this narrative, today's societies are dominated by women and feminism to the detriment of men who then have to protect themselves. Masculist actors present themselves as defenders of men in direct opposition to feminism. This discourse is based on a reversal of power relations. Dominant groups are described as victims, while feminist fights are presented as forms of oppression. In cases I have studied, this discourse is not just ideological, it is also economic. Anti-feminism has become a way to monetize online content. It is a product. It is a driver of visibility and revenue. Digital platforms play a central role. They make it easier to spread anti-feminist content through their recommendation algorithms and through their access by young audiences. Anti-feminist discourse can be difficult to identify and counter with existing legal tools. However, its spread normalizes profoundly unequal portrayals of sex relations. My research has proven that anti-feminism today is no longer marginal. It is part of cultural dynamics and overlaps with far-right ideologies. It can also be used by partisan actors to drive out the male vote. Understanding anti-feminism as a structured ideology propagated by identifiable actors and amplified by digital environments is necessary to fully grasp its social and political impact. It is not just a debate of abstract ideas. It is a phenomenon which influences portrayal, socialization, and democracy itself. Thank you for your time. I would now be happy to answer your questions.
Merci.
Thank you. Ms. de Repentigny-Corbet, you have the floor for 5 minutes. Thank you. Madam Chair, committee members. Thank you for this opportunity to speak to you today on behalf of the organization I lead, Les Trois Sexes, an organization that fights for the sex rights and sexual health of women and LGBT people. I'm sure that all the organizations that have appeared before the committee have said something similar. Masculism and anti-feminism are no longer marginal. They are growing across the country and play a key role in our digital and social environments. Comments dismissing gender equality and insulting women circulate both on and offline. All too often, this discourse is presented as harmless, banal opinions. However, these ideologies have true consequences on the dignity, safety, and health of women and girls in Canada. Behind this discourse is an organized online ecosystem called the manosphere. It consists of various masculist groups, incels, men's rights activists, etc., all who share common beliefs: hatred of women and feminists, victimization of men, and the legitimization of violence against women. The numbers are alarming. In Canada, 1 in 5 Canadian women has experienced online harassment. 80% of educators have witnessed sexist or masculist behavior among young boys, and 1/4 of women 13 to 18 have witnessed masculism propagated via technology. These are real lives here, not abstract ideas. Ideas normalized in the manosphere can lead to extreme consequences: psychological distress, self-harm, even suicidal ideation. Increasingly, the manosphere is reaching out to very young boys. 47% of boys 12 to 17 are exposed to sexist or racist content online at least once a week. The problem is obviously not boys. The problem is the narratives being shared with boys, simplistic narratives in which feminists are scapegoated and masculine domination is viewed as a solution. In one study of 1,400 Montreal students, 34% of boys expressed the belief that they should be able to control who their partner interacts with. This can be spread insidiously. Content about, for example, exercise can channel people towards the manosphere. We cannot give up the fight, and actions can be done to solve this issue. To counter masculism, there needs to be massive investments in education and awareness. This is not about stigmatizing boys. It is about giving them safe spaces to develop critical thinking skills, understand online radicalism, and reflect on models of healthy, nonviolent, egalitarian masculinity. This cannot stop at the school level. Adult men can also improve their digital literacy skills and anti-radicalism abilities. There are already people out in the field doing this essential work, focused on prevention, outreach, crisis intervention, and more besides. They develop tools to counter misinformation, support victims, and give people the tools they need. These actions are effective. They reduce masculist discourse and hamper radicalization, but these organizations are on the brink. The problems are getting more complex, and funding is running out. Without transformational change, it will be difficult to act in advance. There could be a concrete difference. Investments could save lives and counter hateful ideologies. Thank you.
Now you'll have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the committee for the invitation. My name is Dina, and I'm speaking on behalf of the Ontario Coalition of Rape Crisis Centres, or OCRCC. We are a provincial network representing sexual assault centres across Ontario. Our member centres work directly with survivors of sexual violence and provide survivor-centred, trauma-informed services in communities, public education, and systems-level advocacy. Our remarks today reflect what our member centres are seeing on the ground and how anti-feminist ideology is undermining survivor safety, disclosure, and access to justice. Based on the work of our member centres, anti-feminist ideology is not abstract. It is producing direct and material harm for survivors of sexual violence and the organizations that support them. Centres are experiencing intensified harassment and backlash, including coordinated online attacks, intimidation at survivor-led events, and the spread of narratives that frame feminism and survivor advocacy as ideological, deceptive, or harmful. This environment is creating a chilling effect on disclosure and help-seeking. Survivors are choosing not to report sexual violence, not to testify, not to attend public events, and not to seek services due to fear of online pile-ons, doxing, and reputational harm. Member centres are also seeing the weaponization of legal and administrative processes used to intimidate and silence survivors and service providers. The result is not less sexual violence, but less disclosure and reduced access to supports. It is also essential for us to situate anti-feminist ideology within a settler colonial context. Both the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls identify sexual violence as an ongoing consequence of colonial practices, institutional failures, and systemic inequality. The MMIW G2S report in particular names this violence as persistent and structural rather than isolated. Anti-feminist ideology reinforces these conditions by denying systemic harm, dismissing survivor-centered and feminist analysis, and resisting accountability for state and institutional failures to prevent sexual violence. Anti-feminist ideology does not take hold in a vacuum. It is enabled by structural conditions that weaken responses to sexual violence. First and foremost, precarious funding to sexual assault centers, particularly for public education and prevention work, limits the sector's ability to counter misinformation, respond to harassment, and engage in sustained efforts to challenge rape myths. Second, there is a lack of coordinated national data on sexual violence, which undermines evidence-based policymaking and allows misleading narratives about prevalence, reporting, and credibility to persist. Third, gaps in trauma-informed and survivor-centered responses, especially within legal and institutional systems, create conditions where survivors of sexual violence are re-traumatized or disbelieved and where anti-feminist narratives appear legitimate. The impacts of anti-feminist ideology are not evenly distributed. Indigenous, racialized, migrant, queer, trans, two-spirit, and disabled survivors face compounded barriers to disclosure, credibility, safety, and justice. These survivors are more likely to experience intensified scrutiny, disbelief, and retaliation when they come forward. Addressing anti-feminist ideology and its impacts on survivors of sexual violence requires concrete policy action. We urge the committee to consider the following. First, stable long-term federal funding for sexual assault centers, including funding dedicated to public education and prevention work that combats masculinist, anti-feminist ideologies. Second, stronger protections against the misuse of legal and administrative processes to silence survivors in sexual assault centers. Third, meaningful implementation of the TRC calls to action and calls for justice related to sexual violence prevention, trauma-informed systems, and accountability. Anti-feminist ideology is making it harder for survivors of sexual violence to come forward. If we are serious about safety, mental health, and justice, this reality must be addressed. Thank you for your time. I welcome the committee's questions.
So now we're going to go into our rounds of questions. As you can see, when there's 1 minute left in the time, I will give you the yellow card, and when there's 30 seconds left, you'll get the red card. And we're going to start our round of questions with Ms. Roberts for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the witnesses. I appreciate your time, and hopefully we can come to some ideas on how we can improve the situation. I'm going to ask all three of you to comment about the education piece. Does anyone have any numbers on how individuals were educated to stop their thinking of anti-feminism? Let's start with Tristan.
Mr. Boursier?
Mr. Boursier, you could go first.
Merci pour votre question.
Thank you for the question. I don't work specifically in education, so I don't have data on that specific question, but I would note it does seem like an appealing avenue. There are specialists who work on this question. I would also like to note that there are some key players, web giants and social media, who spread anti-feminism, and some anti-feminists are directly focused on our schools. For this reason, we need to ask ourselves whether schools are strong enough to defend against such attacks.
Okay, thank you. And would anyone else like to add anything to that?
Yes, I'd like to respond. I think research and practice shows that anti-feminist thinking can be reduced through early education, specifically on healthy masculinities, on consent, on healthy relationships, on engaging men and boys as allies. And sexual assault centers have been leading that work in community for decades, despite chronic underfunding and really limited funds earmarked for public education. But it's a cornerstone of the sexual assault center model to integrate that public education piece to combat anti-feminist and hegemonic masculinities.
And last but not least.
Merci pour la question.
Thank you for the question. Yes, studies have shown that prevention, awareness, and education can help deconstruct masculism and increase critical thinking skills. These techniques can be used in the current context. I would like to note that education does not stop at the school doors. There are many boys and many Canadians who spread these ideologies outside schools. People need to be educated on digital literacy and gender equality. There are people out in the field doing that essential work. As for whether I have specific data on the rise of anti-feminism, I would say that things are speeding up. Technology is becoming more advanced, but education is still an important tool to deconstruct hateful ideologies.
Have any data? I'd really appreciate it, because it'll help us, to maybe advance that in our findings and ensure that we get that education piece in there. So my next question again is, we talk about anti-feminism. What about the parents? Where are they on this whole topic? Do you feel it's a failure of parenting? Anyone can answer. I'm good with it.
Je peux tenter une...
I can attempt an answer. Not at all. I don't think a majority of parents have bad intentions. I think they may have a lack of knowledge about what is going on online. There needs to be better digital literacy, better understanding and oversight of what is going on, a better understanding of online terminology, because these ideologies are rampant online. I would not want to blame parents. I just think parents need to be targeted by awareness training and outreach so they can stop their sons from adopting hateful ideologies. This can start very early. These ideologies can be spread to boys as young as 9, 10, 11. As such, parents have an important role to play, but they need to have the requisite awareness.
If we are examples to our children and we project that in the home setting, do you not feel that that would generate beyond that? And if they do, and if they are exposed to online activity, would that not be a deterrent? Because that's not the way that we would, like, I know for myself, I've raised my son to treat women or men or anybody with respect.
I would like to respond.
Thank you.
I think supporting parents with resources is certainly essential, but it's part of a whole of community response and a whole of community approach to violence prevention. We all have a personal responsibility to end not only anti-feminist attitudes, but violence against women and gender diverse people generally. And so supporting parents with resources is part of that, because parents are essential partners in prevention, but it doesn't end with parents, right? There's coaches and teachers.
That's the end of your time, Ms. Roberts. Now we're going to Madame Menard, 6 minutes.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
6 minutes. Thank you, Madam Chair. To our witnesses, thank you for taking the time to be with us today. Your expertise will enrich our study. This study is troubling for us, but fascinating as well, if I can speak on behalf of the committee. We are approaching the end of our study, and Mr. Boursier, in your opening remarks, there was something that drew my attention. It seemed a bit like the path less traveled. You said that anti-feminist ideology has real economic impacts. I would be interested in hearing from you about that. Thank you. You said feminist ideology. It is actually anti-feminist ideology, of course. My data show that anti-feminism is not just political and ideological. It is also a way to gain money for influencers. These two aspects are intertwined. We ought to do more to understand how these ideas can spread and win people over. Anti-feminism is not new. It has been around for a long time. It spans centuries. But what does seem new is this intensity, number one, and also the ability of anti-feminism to reach younger audiences. For this reason, I am focusing on social media. I observed that anti-feminism is sometimes propagated by people who are not necessarily themselves anti-feminists, as people strive to monetize their content. So for lots of people, anti-feminism is a business model. Yes, that I could say that. People don't always make a profit off of anti-feminism, but this is a trend we are seeing, and there are some extremely popular business models. Because they're so successful, these models inspire less successful influencers hoping to make a quick buck. Ms. Rapontigny, Ms. Haddish, you both spoke about prevention. I have been hearing similar discourse in the House for a number of years now. But some people say if prevention worked, we would already see the impacts of it. Perhaps not enough is being invested, or perhaps there are better ways to fight violence. Could you speak a little bit about this? Thank you for that question. I would say that prevention works. Preventive action is real. Currently, hundreds of boys are being kept out of the manosphere or have increased critical thinking abilities due to preventive action. Prevention works. Of course, we could always go farther and should. Technology is moving quickly and language is evolving quickly. Sometimes parents don't even understand the terminology being used. So yes, there needs to be more education starting at a very young age. People are first exposed to content about sexuality online at the age of 9 and 10, but also adults need to be educated and targeted by awareness efforts. This has a real impact. The data show that it works, and we need to go farther to continue the good effects. Ms. Haddish, you spoke a little bit about funding. Would you like to add on to what Ms. de Repentigny-Corbet said? How relevant is it to fund preventive efforts?
Absolutely. It is, it's incredibly relevant. I think our member centers see indicators every day that these programs do work and reduce harmful beliefs, encourage survivors to seek help, and engage communities in dialogue about violence. Yet chronic underfunding and limited reach means the impact is hard to see on a large scale. Data collection and scaling programs is difficult. And so consistent investment in these things and coordination and support for community-based prevention efforts is essential if we want to see those long-term reductions in sexual violence and anti-feminist ideology. Prevention works. It's not an immediate fix. Changing attitudes, changing deeply ingrained social norms and behaviors takes sustained effort, time, years. So I think if we want to see long-term reductions in sexual violence and anti-feminist ideology, we need to see consistent investment across the board.
En moins de 30 secondes, Madame de
In less than 30 seconds, Ms. de Repentigny-Corbet, have you established a correlation between the rise in anti-feminist ideology and the rise of transphobia and homophobia, which imperil broader populations than just women? Yes, yes, yes. It is all connected. These currents come from the same place. They try to restrict people and hold people inside predefined roles in society. Homophobia, transphobia, and anti-feminism are all interrelated. Thank you. Ms. LaRouche, you have 6 minutes. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to our 3 witnesses for participating in this study. I listened to your opening remarks, and it reminded me of the reason why I wanted to do this study. We don't talk enough about the rise of anti-feminism. Where I'm from, there was a documentary shown on the Polytechnic shooting, and I was greatly troubled by what I saw. Beyond the story of Polytechnic, people were asking why, or rather, explaining why we need to talk about this rise of anti-feminism. The documentary was first shown in 2023 in locations across Quebec. The 2 creators of the film, Dalphond and Boucher, were particularly concerned about the dark web and the manosphere. These masculist movements, these influencers who recruit people into anti-feminism and feed the beast, as it were. My first question, and also, this was presented to students in Granby, and at the end, one of the presenters asked, who knows who Andrew Tate is, who follows him on social media? He said, don't worry, don't be shy, we're not here to judge you. I was really shocked to see that a majority of young men followed Andrew Tate, students at CEGEP. So we can talk about prevention, and I will circle back to that, but Ms. de Repentigny-Corbet, you talked about the manosphere. Mr. Boursier, you also talked about links between the rise of the far right and all of the ties between these various movements. What can we do to counter the effects of the dark web in the manosphere? Can the government equip itself to ensure that hateful discourse does not spread in these spaces? There are people in there saying that it's a shame Marc Le Pen didn't kill more women. How can we respond to that? What can the government do? Sorry, I know that was a long introduction. I will now give you the floor.
Mr. Boursier.
Mr. Boursier, thank you for that question. I would like to note that you don't have to go to the dark web to experience these sorts of groups. Research shows that if you create a new TikTok account today, say, within a day, the algorithm will put you in touch with violent content, and specifically, masculine content. If you indicate that when you build your profile that you are a man, so you get exposed to this sort of content very quickly. It's hard to counter through legal means because not all of this discourse comes in the form as calls for violence. It's sometimes portrayed as victimization or humor, or is mixed in with other ideologies such as libertarianism or entrepreneurship or even stoicism. This means that masculinism and anti-feminism reach diverse audiences of young men. So, could we not do something? And I'd be interested in hearing from you as well, Ms. de Repentigny-Corbet. Could we not hold these platforms accountable? Is there nothing we could do to hold them accountable for the hateful content that they spread? 2 years ago, there was a petition surrounding the documentary entitled Salut Salope. It asked people it asked key players to intervene to counter hateful content. Thank you for that question and those reflections. It's difficult to see how slowly things are moving. In fact, I think we're backsliding. There's still a lot of violence out there. I would note that it's a continuum. Often we make a clear distinction between what's online and what's offline, but it's a continuum. Ms. Haddish would probably agree. Online discourse can lead to real-life violence. Everyone is constantly on their phones or on their computers. It's all connected, and there is a continuum between what is online and what is offline in our daily lives. I would say yes, platforms should be held accountable. Last year, Meta let people start saying that women are objects and homosexuality is a mental illness. Unfortunately, our ability to control the platforms is limited. As such, I would recommend measures to increase critical thinking and counter disinformation. It's not just Andrew Tate. There's pickup artists assigning each other little tasks. All sorts of groups are spreading this content, and that's why there needs to be greater awareness and greater prevention. Thank you.
Ms. Cody for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for joining us at committee today. It's greatly appreciated to hear more from everyone. My questions are going to be directed to Monsieur Boursier. Can you tell us briefly in your own words what feminism is to you, and how would you define anti-feminism?
Mr. Boursier.
Mr. Boursier, Thank you for that question. There are all sorts of feminist currents. There's different ways of thinking, but they all focus on gender equality, not just men-women equality, equality between all genders. Anti-feminism, as I noted in my introduction, is opposition to this value, to this fight for equality. Just as there is a diversity of feminist currents, there is also a diversity of anti-feminist currents. We focused on masculism, which is one subcategory of anti-feminism.
Thank you for that. So would you agree that the number one job of government is to keep us all safe?
Mr. Boursier?
Mr. Boursier. Yeah. Safety is an important value in a democracy.
Okay, that's great. Now, I have here like stats that actually show that from 2015 to 2024, that intimate partner violence against women has increased by 38.64%, hate crimes against women increased 725%, and total sexual assaults are up 76%. Would you agree or disagree, based on your definitions and the steady decline of women's safety, that this government has anti-feminist policies? And are these policies doing a good job protecting and standing up for women?
J'ai pas fait d'évaluation des politiques du gouvernement.
I have not carried out an assessment of the current government's policies, so I would not want to make a statement there. That's a question for political scientists. I would note that there is an increase in violence against women going on, all sorts of different crimes and offenses, and there has also been an increase in the degree to which anti-feminist values are accepted in society, in particular among boys.
Okay, you've dealt a lot with studying the online harms and what is happening. So I was wondering if this committee has previously hosted a witness that monetizes rhetoric specifically designed to sow division and create conflict. Like one of the quotes is, "I feel very honored that I can break awful men's brains and apparently careers simply by existing," unquote. Would you agree that female influencers who use their platforms to antagonize others and specifically create gender-based conflict are doing more harm than good to the cause of feminism?
Je ne sais pas de qui vous voulez parler.
I'm not sure exactly who you are referring to. I don't understand the context this quote comes from. Gender can be debated in a democracy. It should be devoted in a peaceful and nonviolent way. It can be approached in various different ways. I cannot give any further comments given that I do not understand the full context this quote comes from.
Okay, so my next question is going to be for Dina Haddish. I want to ask you the same question, whether if you could tell me briefly in your own words what feminism is to you and how would you define anti-feminism?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Sexual Assault Center movement started with grassroots feminist organizing in the 70s. Feminism is a movement and a set of ideas that seek gender equality and justice, challenging violence, discrimination, and barriers that affect women, girls, and gender diverse people. And anti-feminism refers to those ideas and narratives that we've discussed today that oppose or undermine feminist principles that are fundamentally egalitarian, often by dismissing gender equality, questioning survivor credibility in the context of violence, and attacking organizations that seek to support gender equity and survivor safety. So, in short, feminism works to reduce harms and promote equality, and anti-feminism works to resist that.
So in your line of work, you see a lot of harm being done to women, and you must notice that the increase. Do you feel that in the last 10 years that has been a significant increase to the harm towards women?
Absolutely. I think over the past decade, our member centers have seen a notable increase in harassment, intimidation, and barriers to disclosure, as well as shifting kind of social tides that allow folks to come forward and disclose more often, but without a subsequent increase in resources and supports for survivors. So the harm may not always be reflected in official statistics, but the risks to disclosure and access to supports as well have grown significantly over the past decade.
Very good. And now we go to Ms. Khalid for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for being here today. I just want to make a quick point. We're talking about the online space and anti-feminist ideologists dominating that space, and yet we just asked you a question about the negative impacts of women trying to own that space and claiming their own identities online. Dr. Broussier, if I may, can I please have you comment on that, please?
I didn't quite understand that question. Could you be a little bit more specific?
Well, we're talking about the online space, and what we've heard in the testimony today is about it being dominated, where people are making money off of anti-feminist ideology. But when we talk about women taking ownership of online space as well to be more I guess, identity-seeking and to be proud of their identity, we tend to say, well, no, you should be a little bit more meek. You shouldn't be attracting attention to yourself. You should continue to play the victim and be inside and not take ownership of that space. Do you think that that is rhetoric that is helpful to this conversation?
Oui, tout à fait. Quand on regarde...
Yes, when you look at who anti-feminists are opposing, they're opposing feminists. Those are the people who are the primary targets. We have also learned that online discourse can have very real impacts due to doxing. We've all heard of feminist influencers being threatened in their homes. The same is true for members of their family. They experience harassment, which can be ongoing and extremely intense. We already heard about the film Salut Salope. That is a very good example of how bad things can get.
Thank you for that. I really appreciate that analysis. So you talk about, how feminists are being doxxed, they're being targeted, their lives are being threatened, their charter rights are being violated. Let's talk a little bit about accountability for these people. I know that a lot of the conversation around this study has been about prevention, which I think is very important, and about education, which I also think is very important, but it's a generational transition. And as you said, Tristan, that violence against women has been going on for centuries and thousands of years. So where are we with the accountability? Now, I know our government has introduced Bill C-16 to address some of those exact issues that you mentioned of feminists and women being targeted online, in physical spaces, in workspaces. What more do you think we can do in terms of holding people to account that are using anti-feminist ideology either to make money, to incite hatred, and to further perpetuate the violence that women face, sometimes for political gain?
Merci pour cette question. Je n'ai pas...
Thank you for that question. I have not studied this bill in detail, so I could not give a full assessment of it. I would say that Canada is not the only country that is extremely concerned by this phenomenon. This phenomenon exists in other countries, in Western Europe and among our neighbors to the south. For the EU, there was a bill, the Digital Services Act, that was put in place. It was not fully applied, but it has some interesting qualities it might be worth examining. It would require online platforms to be more transparent about their business models. And the reason that they recommend sometimes hateful or anti-feminist or racist content to you online. It would make platforms more accountable through legal mechanisms. That's absolutely something worth considering.
Thank you. Mélène, do you want to comment on this as well?
Oui, merci. Puis j'ai envie de dire que...
Thank you. I would like to say that feminism and all women speaking out, regardless of their political views, who get criticized, well, it's important not to participate in the victim-blaming culture. This idea that, oh, you shouldn't have been online, you shouldn't have shared that photo. No, that's not appropriate. You need to go straight to the source and go after the people who perpetuate these sorts of views.
LaRouche, 2 minutes.
Ms. LaRouche with 2.5 minutes, please. Thank you, Madam Chair. I spoke about certain creators. I would like to also highlight those who created the film Je vous salue salope. They did a great job. Mr. Boursier, you spoke about, among other things, holding platforms accountable. That's also something that Marie-Ève Carignan believes in. She is a researcher at UNESCO who testified before the committee. The political scientist, David Morin, from the University of Sherbrooke, an expert on radicalization, also appeared before the committee. He lamented the lack of statistics and research that would allow us to properly document the rise of online radicalism and hate. As a political scientist, could you comment, or any of the witnesses, could you comment on what it would change if we had more data?
Je me permets de répondre en premier.
I'll answer first. I agree. We lack resources, we lack data. In Canada, there have been studies, some at a more local level, but currently, the data that we do have show that we cannot rest on our laurels. This is a growing and worrying phenomenon. If we compare ourselves to other countries, like the US, the phenomenon is more documented or more present abroad, but things are still very worrying. There needs to be more data, more off-ramps, and more measures to oversee platforms.
Madame de Repentigny.
Ms. de Repentigny, you carry out studies. Could you speak to this? Yes. For every piece of masculine content, there needs to be a piece of educational content. It's important to invest, and it's important to go after the platforms, given their massive audiences. The issue is there could be a lack of data. We have one study that focused on masculism. We tried to promote anti-masculist content, and one in every other post that we tried to put out got taken down because it's viewed as too political or because it refers to the rise of the far right. Thank you. That is the end of Ms. LaRouche's time. We will now move over to Ms. Vien. You have 5 minutes. Thank you. Greetings, everyone. I have a little bit less time in this round, so I'll try to be quick. Mr. Boursier, thank you for being here today. You have spoken about online platforms. Would you be able to identify other forums where anti-feminism is present and where it is evolving? For example, forums that are part of religious movements. I don't want to blame any religions specifically. I'm a Catholic myself, and we know that Catholicism hasn't always been perfect when it comes to women's rights. Women were not able to be ordained as priests, but in other spheres, for example, sci-fi spheres, have you noticed anti-feminism growing? So there's digital platforms, but have you noticed other sources where anti-feminism is on the rise?
Alors,
The rise of anti-feminism, well, I mean, it would be the task of a lifetime to measure it across all areas of society. But anti-feminism doesn't come out of nowhere. We live in a sexist, patriarchal society. And many people are adopting this so-called truth of anti-feminism. Yes, there's some overlap with Catholic spaces. They're not just Catholic spaces, and Mr. Morin has studied this. So it's not exclusive to social media platforms. It's broader than that. Okay. Mr. Boursier, what do you have to say about women who use this sort of model? I've seen the sort of content you refer to. We've seen these business models, but there are women out there following these men. There was this event in Texas where all sorts of women came together to express the very values propagated by anti-feminist men. What can you say about that? Yes, there are female influencers who promote anti-feminism. They're a minority, according to my research. But some are very visible. And the fact that they're women gives them credibility and greater latitude to make sexist or anti-feminist comments. They use their status as a woman and hide behind this idea that it's impossible for a woman to be an anti-feminist. There was a study by SUDA on right-wing women, women against gender equality. This studied their positions and their advocacy. I would note that women are still a minority in these spheres. Of course, we should not conflate women who want to stay at home with anti-feminists. That's their own choice. You said that masculism comes from this idea that feminists have gone too far. How far is too far for these men who denigrate women and who do not believe in gender equality? What's too far for them? These are men with a vision of the world that is completely disconnected from reality. For them, women are advantaged in all areas of society, in politics, in the economy, in the world of justice. They view men as being victims of society. So that's why they view feminists as having gone too far. However, this discourse is distinct from critiques of feminism that propose alternatives. That is, egalitarian alternatives. No, rather, this is wholesale opposition to all forms of feminism. When I was in Cégep, my boyfriend's father at the time said, "How come you play soccer? That's a man's sport." But there's still hope, I suppose.
For the final 5 minutes to Mr. Chen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question, I'll begin with Ms. Hadish. For survivors of sexual violence who also identify as two-spirited LGBTQ+, or Black, Indigenous, or racialized, are crisis services and supports sufficient for them?
Thank you for this question. Crisis services are essential, but they're not currently sufficient to fully address the compounded barriers that come with systemic racism, discrimination, and culturally unsafe services, which make disclosure and access to support more difficult. So services exist, but gaps still do remain in providing culturally relevant, safe, and trauma-informed approaches. So centers do provide excellent support services, but structural inequities mean that some survivors experience additional barriers to preventing full access to services. So it definitely is an area that needs further investment.
It sounds like there are lived experiences that need to be shared to better understand the compounded barriers that women of color, for example, face. why do you believe those stories are not being heard?
I think when we think about rates of sexual violence, barriers to accessing reporting are already very, very high. So it's not that, survivors facing repeated barriers without clear support reinforces the sense that their safety and voices are not prioritized. So it's structural, and effective action in that way requires investment from government in services to increase access to culturally relevant and sensitive services, not only to racialized folk, but along the gamut of trans and two-spirit and gender diverse survivors, to ensure that services are not just being replicated, but being tailored to specific contexts and marginalizations and structural barriers that folks experience.
Thank you. What can the federal government do to better support survivors experiencing intersectionality, and to ensure that organizations are working to address diverse needs in a culturally responsive way?
I think that the biggest thing governments can do is support this by funding organizations to provide specialized programming. Sexual assault centers are operating at a deficit year over year to provide services. There are lengthy wait lists. So funding organizations to provide services, period, but expanding that support to provide specialized programming for culturally relevant services rooted in training staff in equity and cultural safety are also extremely important.
Can the federal government do this work alone? Can the federal government solve this issue alone? Who are the other stakeholders that you believe need to be at the table and to contribute to addressing these issues?
No, absolutely. Violence prevention and response is the responsibility of all of us. It supersedes federal governments. It's federal, it's provincial, it's at the local and grassroots levels as well. So there's a piece of that responsibility lies with governments at all levels to ensure that we're not only providing funding to instances of gender-based and sexualized violence as they occur.
So speaking of the last 10 years, I know that we've seen in provinces and other levels of government legislation being introduced that excludes and is harmful to trans and gender diverse youth. How do policies like this impact the overall objectives to create a more equitable society for women?
Yes, I would say that policies that are not inclusive of trans and gender diverse survivors and youth, create barriers and prevent access to services, as well as reinforcing stigmas, which undermine the goals of survivor-centered support and sexual violence prevention as a whole. And so when we create equitable policies that can ensure that services, education initiatives, and support services recognize and respond to instances of violence with a variety of gender identities, that creates safer spaces for youth to come forward, to access help, and to participate fully in prevention initiatives as well.
Thank you so much. And that's the end of our time for the first panel. I want to thank all the witnesses for your contributions today. That was great. What we'll do is we'll suspend briefly to bring in the next panel of witnesses, and we'll come right back. before we introduce our new witnesses, I just want to make a few reminders for the witnesses that are here in the room. You'll be able to get your hearing devices and to set which language you want, English, French, or the floor, which gives you both. Same on Zoom, it's at the bottom of your screen. If you could wait until I recognize you by name before speaking, and if you want to speak, raise your hand. Those on Zoom, please use the raise hand function, and all comments should be addressed through the chair. So now let me introduce our witnesses. We have Francis Dupuy-Derry, professeur titulaire, chantier sur l'antiféminisme.
A professor, an expert in anti-feminism at the Université du Québec à Montréal.
Also, we have Dr. Kyle Ganson, assistant professor, factor in Wintash, Faculty of Social Work, University of Toronto. And we have Pascal Vaillancourt, Directeur Général.
Director General.
Commencer avec...
So thank you. And we will begin with Mr. Dupuy-Derry. You have 5 minutes. Thank you very much. Thanks for having me today. I'm very pleased to be here, and I'm glad that the House of Commons is focused on the issue of anti-feminism. I've been studying this for over 20 years now. I have done research in partnership with women's groups here in Quebec. I've published a number of different books about anti-feminism. Some have been translated into different languages. My work is regularly cited, and I'm currently finishing up a study with the Fédération Autonome de l'Enseignement, which is on sexism, homophobia, and transphobia in Quebec's public elementary and secondary schools. We have interviewed over 50 students. I have also done interviews with many anti-feminists about anti-feminism and have published on the topic. I will share my definition of anti-feminism. You also heard this from other specialists. Anti-feminism is a vast movement with many different currents and different trends and different priorities within it. There's religious anti-feminism, there's nationalistic anti-feminism. I'm focused primarily on masculism, this idea that men are in crisis due to women, feminists, and the feminization of society. This view is often based on pseudoscience and so-called common sense remarks about cavemen and mammoth hunters, or references to hormones in the animal world, but the science is either false or misconstrued. Masculism is adhered to primarily by men, but also some women. And this sort of discourse in the West, Europe, and North America has been around for 500 years, according to historians. Today, anti-feminism is present in every country in the world, from the poorest, like Haiti, to the most powerful, like the United States. Everywhere, men are viewed as being in crisis, regardless of the legal system in place or the circumstances in the country in question. I know that I'm on the clock here, so I'll move forward quickly. I've looked into the sociological and sociocultural circumstances. I would not say that men are in crisis in Quebec and Canada today. But despite the fact that the crisis is false, it can still lead to social impacts, political impacts, cultural impacts. All this discourse about a crisis is leading to societal effects. It is important to properly identify the problem. In COVID, the problem was a virus. Now they're saying that the problem is women and feminists. So anti-feminists believe that women and feminists are a problem for society, for families, for men. They portray themselves as victims. Men and boys, that is. And anti-feminists therefore call for an uprising among men and more resources for men under this belief that women have too many resources as it is. Sometimes the views of women can be misconstrued. Last year, the Minister of Women and Gender Equality marked International Men's Day, so she had fallen into a bit of a trap. This is a day with no value, and yet the very Minister of Women and Gender Equality herself fell into it. Violence is also an issue. There were 3 attacks based on anti-feminist principles in Ontario and in Canada. There was an attack on a gender philosophy class in Waterloo. There was the vehicle ramming attack in Toronto. People have been injured. In all 3 cases, these were overtly anti-feminist attacks.
Thank you so much. Now we'll go to Dr. Ganson. You have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much. Madam Chair and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to be here today. The core problem I really want to highlight is the way that problematic masculine gender norms turn the male body into a social project, a visible performance of power, dominance, and control. In this context, 25% of boys and men are engaging in any muscle-building behavior. 1 in 5 boys is exercising to build muscle every day of the week, and 6% of males will use anabolic androgenic steroids in their lifetime. For many, this is not merely about fitness or aesthetics. It is about adhering to an ideal of manhood that carries significant social and political meaning. Online platforms supercharge this dynamic. Boys and men are drawn into endless feedback loops that insist their worth, status, and even safety depend on how their bodies look and perform. These loops are saturated with influencers and communities across social media that position the male body as a symbol of transformation, functionality, and social power. Social media serves as a deep well of how-to knowledge for achieving and maintaining a muscular, lean, and strong body and a chiseled, attractive face. Current trends like looks maxing mainstream manosphere ideologies, namely that boys and men must maximize their attractiveness to compete in a world where they believe girls and women now have the power. This trend is associated with appearance obsessions, linking physical attractiveness to self-worth, and comparisons that turn the body into a battleground, framing failure as personal inadequacy and success as a way to reclaim power. The mental and social health consequences are significant. For many boys and men, the pursuit of these ideals is accompanied by anxiety, compulsive routines, and deep insecurity, rather than well-being. What's more, many of these behaviors correlate with physical fighting, weapon carrying, criminal offending, intimate partner violence, and polysubstance use. We know that eating disorders and muscle dysmorphia are also on the rise among this population. And for many boys and men, they will be drawn into virtual spaces that promote misogyny and extreme ideologies, leading to anti-feminist beliefs. There are 3 drivers to explain why these behaviors and ideas take hold. First, the idea of belonging. These communities provide a sense of identity and brotherhood, fostering mutual support and collaboration toward shared goals that many boys and men struggle to find elsewhere. Second, status. The body becomes a visible marker of worth. Muscularity and physical attractiveness signal power in online and offline hierarchies. And third, control. In a world where many boys and men feel increasingly powerless, the body and the symbolism attached to it promise a way to regain control, of course, often at the expense of others. So what should we do? The solutions must be targeted, multifaceted, and interdisciplinary, and they must be framed to call boys and men in, not push them out. I offer 5 integrated recommendations drawn from this analysis. First, we need to reframe masculinity as positive and inclusive and avoiding isolating language. Using terms like toxic masculinity can alienate boys and men, hardening grievances and fueling backlash. We should highlight how masculinity can be positive, inclusive, to encourage more boys and men to participate in change efforts. Number 2, we need to build and fund positive male communities. We need mentorship, coaching, and peer engagement initiatives that reduce isolation and foster healthy environments where boys and men can practice connection, accountability, and care without relying on the dominance script. Number 3, we need to destigmatize and provide resources for mental health in boys and men. Share messages that normalize help-seeking for issues that are often seen as feminine, including anxiety, depression, and poor body image. Help boys and men develop the language to identify, understand, and express their thoughts and emotions clearly, and then create the space to listen. Number 4, promote health and media literacy with a critical perspective on masculinity. help boys and men identify harmful online communities and health behaviors, and encourage reflection on the body ideals associated with masculinity. This literacy inoculates against algorithmic feedback loops that tether self-worth to dominance and appearance. And number 5, address the root of the issue and enhance regulations for online platforms that enable the spread of content negatively impacting boys and men. Eliminating algorithmic rabbit holes and feedback loops that push men towards harmful content will help them no matter what. In closing, if we understand how the male body is being used to perform and perpetuate problematic masculine gender norms and how online platforms supercharge this dynamic, we can build pathways towards healthier, more equitable expressions of masculinity. These pathways keep boys and men engaged, reduce harm, and improve mental and social health outcomes for boys and for men and everyone else around them. Thank you.
Thank you. And now we'll go to Monsieur Vaillancourt. Vous avez la parole pour 5 minutes.
Merci.
You have the floor for 5 minutes. Thank you. Thank you for that invitation. First, I would like to thank you for having me. My name is Pascal Vaillancourt. Since 2015, I have been at the head of Interligne, formerly known as Gay Écoute, a community resource by and for LGBTQ+ communities. For 45 years, our flagship service has been a live assistance, support, and information service available 24/7 in French and English throughout Canada. Every year, almost 20,000 people contact us by telephone, live chat, or text. Even though most of our clients come from Quebec since 2022, we have been trying to spread word about ourselves in English Canada, especially in Francophone OLMCs. Our team is trained and accredited in suicide prevention and intervention, which is indispensable in the current context of heightened distress. In Interligne, we hear about the stories, the suffering, and the distress of LGBTQ+ people and their loved ones. Since the pandemic, and especially in the last 2 or 3 years, we have been witnessing a clear increase of this distress. More calls referring to suicidal ideation, as well as increased demand linked to psychological distress. These findings are consistent with the model of minority stress, which shows that repeated exposure to stigmatization and hostile speech deteriorates mental health, leading to anxiety, depression, and suicidal thoughts. Our internal statistics confirm significant increases for the following reasons: discrimination and racism, 308%, victim of violence, 110%, concerns about the social and socio-political climate and context, 119% increase, gender dysphoria, 529% increase, needs of therapy, 293% over the last few years. We do not claim that there is one cause for all of these, but these increases are co-occur with the diffusion of hateful discourse that we document through our services and in our interventions. To consolidate our perceptions, in 2024, Interligne hired Léger, a polling firm, to create a whole of Canada survey on LGBTQ+ mental health. 86% of the LGBTQ+ people responding noted at least one mental health challenge in the previous year versus 64% for non-LGBTQ+ people. 70% were worried about backsliding in rights. 68% had lived discrimination or insecurity. These findings are in line with what we witness at our helpline. How anti-feminist ideology feeds into homophobia and transphobia. Anti-feminist ideology and anti-LGBTQ+ discourse are increasingly enmeshed. Under the cover of protecting women or protecting children or tales of moral panic and biological essentialisms, trans women are excluded from society and hostility towards LGBTQ+ people is normalized. These dynamics, well documented in research, contribute to social polarization, the normalization of hate, and increased violence with harmful impacts for both LGBTQ+ people and the women that anti-feminists claim to protect. Trans women, targeted violence and discrimination. At our helpline and in our legal clinic, we hear a great deal about transphobic violence, particularly targeting trans women. For example, employment discrimination, refusal of housing or loss of housing, harassment, explicit threats. These realities are in line with academic studies carried out in Quebec and Canada, including studies by the Chaire de recherche sur la diversité sexuelle et la pluralité des genres at UQAM. A generalized rise of violence. Day after day, our teams witness a clear increase in violence. We hear about assaults more frequently, as well as threats and harassment. Dating apps, which should be used as socialization spaces, have become a place of hatred with homophobic, transphobic insults, efforts to trick or trap gay and trans people and bully or harass them. This leads to increased fear and stress. We also hear about these issues going on in schools and school systems. Discomfort with LGBTQ themes is on the rise. Anti-feminism is being normalized. More and more boys share anti-feminist views, something that various community groups have been reporting. Feminist rhetoric is being weaponized to open the door to transphobic comments or to exclude trans people. A form of so-called benevolent sexism. This exacerbates distress among LGBTQ plus people. To conclude, at Interling, in our call center, in our legal clinics, in schools, and in other programs, we witness an increase of distress in LGBTQ plus people. We also observe this through our Léger poll in 2024. The rise of more radical and ideological right-wing and anti-feminist ideology is not theoretical. By joining with anti-gender movements, they feed into homophobia and transphobia, normalize violence, increase psychological distress. We need to do something. We believe in the importance of the following. First, a strong political commitment to...
Je m'excuse. Peut-être on va avoir les questions pour vous. Nous allons commencer avec Madame Vien pour 6 minutes.
Madame la Présidente, bonjour.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for making yourselves available today. Mr. Francis, welcome to the committee and thank you for being here. I have quite a few questions for you. You say that men are not experiencing a crisis due to women, but are they in a crisis at all? And if so, why?
Non, en fait, moi je...
No. I would say that we men are not in crisis. Sure, men can experience problems. There are sociological realities and irregularities in which men can experience problems in various domains, but this is not due to women. Most decision makers are not women. For example, in the socioeconomic sphere, in socioeconomics, most decisions are made by men. If men experience problems, this is not due to women. Sure, at an interpersonal level, a certain individual could have problems due to another individual, but that's it. Mr. Dupuy-Derry, you gave a definition of anti-feminism and noted that this contains a number of strains of thoughts within it. There's religious anti-feminism, nationalistic anti-feminism, and you were more specifically focused on masculism. Do these three strains come together? I asked the same question to Mr. Boursier earlier. It's a good question. In the early 2000s, when we started to look into this, there was a movement of separated and divorced men who declared themselves the spokespeople of masculism. And we were curious. We were wondering what they thought about racism and immigration and all that. Today, as Mr. Boursier himself noted, we are witnessing an increased fusion between various far-right strains of thought. These ideologies are much stronger than they were 20 years ago. And all of these strains of thought have the same basis. You're victims due to racialized people, due to women, due to gender-diverse people. All of these movements portray white men as victims of something and in need of help.
Vous dites, c'est un peu...
Great. your predecessor on the committee noted that for 500 years, people have been acting to prevent equality. Is there any hope? You're not asking the right person. I'm a bit of a pessimist. But women's movements in Quebec and Canada have made significant advancements in the last 2 or 3 generations, and that's not nothing. Women have advanced considerably. Whenever there's progress towards equality, there's always resistance. So resistance is normal. We would like there not to be resistance, but it will always be there. Men-women equality is complicated. It is something that affects people's most intimate relationships. It's not just a vague principle. It's something that has an impact on your most intimate family and romantic relations. We see fewer men in female-dominated professions in recent years. The FAE has carried out a study. In early childhood centers, in schools, even high schools, would you say that there's not enough male role models to, go out and kick the soccer ball around and let boys express themselves, get their masculine energy out? I hope you can see where I'm going with this. Would you say that there's not enough men talking to our boys and serving as role models? There have been studies on this topic in the field of educational science. As I understand it, there's not a major impact on school performance based on whether the teacher is male or female. There's a certain masculine strain that talks about getting more men into schools. That should be noted. It's as for how to reach our young men, it's very simple. They need to open their minds and read more. Physical education can certainly be integrated into schools more, but what about male role models, healthy male role models who respect women, who advocate for equality? Are there enough male role models in key positions? There could always be more, but what I'm telling you is that a good teacher can always guide boys towards academic success.
Merci beaucoup.
Merci beaucoup.
Is that it? Thank you.
6 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you, I want to thank all of you for being here. You could certainly benefit from the knowledge that you could share with us today. I wanted to direct my first question to Mr. Where am I here? All right. The Professor Derry. You've alluded to this. I just wanted to get your view and to elaborate on that. Do you feel like lately political leaders using anti-DEI or anti-woke languages to deliberately appeal to young men who are feeling angry or left behind? In other words, political leaders having used their social media to maybe attract men who hate women into their fear. Can you talk about this and give some examples of what you have seen lately?
Merci beaucoup pour la question.
Thank you for that question. I don't want to self-promote here, but I wrote a book specifically on the anti-woke movement back in 2022. And yes, the anti-woke movement is an attack. When they say woke, they're referring to feminists and anti-racists and people who are gender diverse. When you go after woke people, you are going after feminists. This is old rhetoric that dates back to the Reagan era in the U.S. I don't know if you remember, but back in the 80s, people would talk about angry white men. And Reagan spoke about them as being victims of women and black women. This was all over the TV and radio waves. It was documented by the sociologist Mello. Today, we have Fox News out there saying that Donald Trump's tariffs are manly tariffs. This was on Fox News. They said that Trump's tariffs would solve the crisis of masculinity. So we are witnessing this sort of rhetoric targeted primarily at middle class and working class white men, telling them that they're victims of women and minorities, and that's very problematic. It's not women who shut down factories and sent companies overseas. It's not women who decreased wages in the industrial sector.
Thank you so much for that answer. And I would go now to Mr. Gadsden. Mr. Gadsden, I wanted to ask you about the AI tools that are used both to recommend content and to moderate online spaces, including detecting harassment, hate speech, and non-consensual images. From your perspective, how do failure or biases in AI moderation system contribute to the spread of anti-feminist or gender-based harassment online? And what impact does this have on young people's mental health and willingness to seek help or participate in public spaces?
I think it's a great question. I think we're already seeing, number one, AI-generated imagery and content that is, in the context that I work in, which is body image and perpetuation of body ideals, that is actually doing that. It's perpetuating a very particular appearance for males and females. And that, of course, is perpetuating pressures for young people in particular to look a specific way. It also then, the algorithms then promote, that content gets promoted over and over again through the algorithms, through those rabbit holes, through the engagement that happens online with people, either comments, liking, sharing, et cetera. And then that, again, is perpetuated by AI-generated algorithms. So it just continues to explode. And of course, we sort of, young people are on social media a lot, and so that they're seeing this information, they're internalizing this information, and it can be very harmful to how they see the world, how they see themselves, leading to mental health struggles, leading to anti-feminist beliefs or misogynistic ideas, et cetera.
Thank you for that. Oh, good. I'll go to Mr. Pascal. You were going to make some recommendations, and we cut you off, so I'll give you some time to do those recommendations.
En fait, mes recommandations sont...
My recommendations are simple. Currently, we are witnessing a rise in hatred all over the place with masculist and anti-feminist discourse. For this reason, there needs to be really robust resource to support victims, for example, in the LGBTQ plus ecosystem. Our ecosystem is very fragile. Interling is the oldest community resource in Quebec, and it's 45 years old, and our existence is still threatened. When someone is in distress, they could experience further distress. They could even commit suicide. So there needs to be resources available nationwide in all provinces to support LGBTQ plus communities who are impacted by anti-feminist discourse. Also, the government should fund prevention and awareness in various environments. Anti-feminism has its tentacles in a number of different areas, trying to reach out to men wherever they are.
Excellent. And that's the end of your time. Now we'll go to Madame Larouche, 6 minutes.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to our three witnesses for being here today, Mr. Vaillancourt, Professor Ganson, and Mr. Dupuy-Derry. To begin, I'm going to refer to what you spoke about in your opening remarks. Mr. Dupuy-Derry, you piqued my curiosity. You said that the announcement about International Men's Day was a trap. Could you explain what you meant by trap? Thank you for the opportunity to clarify remarks. For a few years now, there have been claims from men's and movements and masculist movements calling for equality. And that opens the door to men. I'm not saying that there shouldn't be reflections on this men and masculinity from a feminist perspective, but we have seen these trends where, for example, funding previously set aside for women has men going after the funding, asking for new criteria. Nowadays, when women receive funding, sometimes they are told, you need to include men in your prevention activities. Highlighting International Men's Day, well, International Men's Day is not recognized by the UN or official Canadian or Quebecois institutions. The government typically only recognizes formal holidays, not days promoted by advocacy groups. So when the minister highlighted this day, various media platforms, which were overtly anti-feminist or overtly masculist, celebrated. They say they were happy. They said they had achieved a win, that people were picking up on their ideas that men are suffering because of women. On the very delicate issue of suicide, well, I have worked on this issue. It is not the fault of women. There's all sorts of issues like that. And to clarify further, International Men's Day, November 19th, comes at the very beginning of Quebec's 12-day campaign on violence against women. So it distorts the media environment. Thank you. Thank you for taking the time to clarify your views. Another question for Mr. Dupuy-Derry, but afterwards, if Professor Ganson or Pascal Vaillancourt, if you want to add anything, you can do so. How can we distinguish between criticisms of feminism and anti-feminist, hateful discourse?
C'est une très bonne question. C'est une question.
That's a great question, and it's a difficult question. Mr. Boursier gave the beginning of an answer when he spoke before the committee. The question is, when you criticize feminists, do you have something else to promote, something else that is egalitarian for men and women, something that promotes women's liberation and women's safety? If all you're doing is criticizing, then you're on the side of the anti-feminists. Anti-feminists offer a lot of criticism. It should be noted that feminism has been criticized, and even feminists criticize themselves. They do their best to figure out the best ways to advance equality between men and women. But when you criticize feminism, you cannot do it in a threatening way or in a way that alludes explicitly to sexual violence. If you do that, you are on the side of the anti-feminists. You have studied masculism, anti-feminism. How are traditional masculinity or toxic masculinity linked to anti-feminism? It has to do with the portrayal of masculinity and femininity, and this might be a little theoretical. Take a look at razors for men and women. For men's razors have a portrayal of strength. It's the Max 3 power razor. For women's razors, you know, they have pictures of cherries and peaches on the box. Masculinity is portrayed as having to do with aggressivity. Even if you look at birthday cards for one-year-olds in 2025, 2026, if you go to a Jean Coutu in Quebec and look at this, they promote aggressiveness for men and tenderness and gentleness for women. Yes, and female products cost more, don't they? So there's a very visible trend there. Mr. Vaillancourt, you spoke a great deal about education. I know I'm running out of time, but You spoke about online platforms, but some people have spoken about the loss of traditional media and noted that this has led to a lack of diversity of voices. Has it had an impact? Our job is awareness and education, so we do a lot of work on that front. And it does yield results, especially when you focus on younger people. Currently, there's a difficult context for schools, for classrooms. We don't always have the resources to go before schools, but we should be doing so. The younger people are, the less their mentalities are set in stone, and I think the time has just run out.
And now we're going to Ms. Roberts for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for being here today. I have a question, and I'm going to start with Mr. Francis. Does anti-feminism manifest differently in different languages or culture?
C'est une très bonne question.
That's a very good question. For language, I'm not sure. For culture, obviously, the cultural references are not always the same. I briefly noted that there is such a thing as nationalistic or community-based anti-feminism. This exists in virtually every community. For example, in Quebec, when at the beginning of the 20th century, when women were seeking the right to vote, anti-suffragettes would say suffragism comes from the UK, it's Protestant, it's foreign, it's not Quebecois. So Quebec women shouldn't have the right to vote because this whole notion was foreign. This idea was propagated everywhere. In African American communities, black feminists complain that some black men say, no, feminism is a white thing, it's a foreign notion. Anti-feminism gets adapted to different cultural contexts, different religious contexts as well. The Vatican has its own arguments about why feminism is a problem. Conservative Jews and Muslims will have other arguments.
I'm going to ask the same question of Mr. Kyle and Mr. Pascal. Mr. Kyle, do you want to answer that?
Can you repeat the question one more time?
Sure.
Thank you.
Does anti-feminism manifest differently in different languages and cultures?
I think that's a really good question. I don't have the expertise in different cultures to be able to say one way or the other, but I would imagine yes. And I think we see that in how different cultures, different belief systems, different cultures, different religions around what gender roles are and the beliefs around what people should and shouldn't be doing. So I would say yes, but I don't have enough expertise to say yes or no.
Mr. Pascal?
Moi, j'ai envie de vous dire que
I would say that what we're observing in the LGBTQ plus community is that LGBT rights in most societies came to pass after there was an openness to women's rights. So when LGBT rights are under attack, we could worry about the future of women's rights. We've witnessed these attacks. They come in institutions, in the media, in various contexts. It's a multi-directional attack, which has all sorts of impacts, including in the current context.
I'm going to ask a little bit of a funny question now, because my late husband always said to me, happy wife, happy life. And I have to say he was a true gentleman, regardless of gender, regardless of who you were, because we were raised in my culture by my grandparents that we treat everyone equally, irregardless. How do you feel about that statement? I'll start with you, Mr. Carson.
I've heard that statement before. I think it's a colloquial statement that I think is said quite often, and I think kind of going back to what was said earlier around just gender. I think gender notions are everywhere. I think objects are gendered, movies are gendered, like everything is gendered. Sayings like that are gendered. And so I think we are embedded in a community and in a world where gender is omnipresent, and that creates dynamics. And I think that's obviously why we're here at the table today. Sometimes it's good and fun, like in a fun way. Other times it's not, right? It's misogynistic, it's anti-feminist. So yeah, I think that's what I would think about that, yeah.
Okay, so I guess I'm going to end it with this. is, you know, I have two children that I've raised, male and female. My late husband passed away. But irregardless, when I spoke to both of them, it was on the same platform. Because irregardless whether I as a female will open a door for a male or a male will open a door for a woman, it doesn't matter, right? We are equal. Would you say that that's correct?
Are you asking me?
Yeah.
Okay. I would not say, I think in different settings, right, there's different levels of equality, right? I think that's an important distinction. Maybe in a certain family, there might be some equality between roles and between genders. But I think there's very clearly a difference in equality at like sort of higher levels of companies, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, yeah, I think it's kind of context specific, maybe. Yeah, that would be maybe my initial.
And that's your time. We're going now to Madame Menard. 5 minutes.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Messieurs.
5 minutes. Thank you, Chair. To all of our witnesses, thank you. Your expertise enriches our study, as troubling as what you told us is. Mr. Dupuy-Derry, I will start with you. At the beginning of our study, we heard from Jake Stika from Next Gen Men. He spoke to us about something fairly interesting, something behavioral. He took us metaphorically back in time and said, if you look at young men in the past, young men would be targeted by different messages, anti-feminist messages, for example. Now today, perhaps counterintuitively, the digital sphere is making inroads amongst young men. And this is leading to increasing violence, including sexist violence. It's as though people feel more comfortable acting out in the physical world due to these views making their way around online. What can you say about this idea that young men are going from passively hearing ideas to acting them out? We carried out focus groups with 50 teachers. We would invite them in to interview them. We told them it would be a discussion about homophobic, transphobic, and sexist students. So a lot of them came expecting to talk about that. We had people from various regions of Quebec. What we found at this focus group was quite disturbing. Studies have borne out that homophobic and transphobic prejudice is on the rise among both boys and girls, though principally among boys. There are insults, they fight with their teachers. There are people, LGBTQ flags have been burned in various schools. Girls have been told that they are taking a spot in the classroom that would rightfully belong to a boy. There are even Nazi salutes in schools, including in other countries like France and Germany. People are, quote-unquote, playing by giving Nazi salutes. We are in a political time which is having an impact on boys. Boys are part of society. They may not be politically involved, but they understand what is going on around them. When Donald Trump won, some boys said, "We won." No one is allowed to tell me what to do anymore. I can say that I'm against gay people. I don't want drag queens in my school anymore. They display Nazi salutes. They say Elon Musk is the richest man in the world. How can a mere teacher tell me what to do? I have the right to do what I please. They are being influenced by the most influential masculists in the entire world, figures that have taken control of the White House. Of course, this would have an impact on all of society. I mean, we're talking about the most influential man on earth. Mr. Vaillancourt, in your opening remarks, you talked about statistics and the levels of demand. You spoke about quantitative data, but we would also like to hear about qualitative information. What is Interling here? What trends is Interling observing? Roughly 20,000 people a year contact Interling through our helpline. What we witnessed is that the reasons for these calls are getting darker. Before, people would contact us saying, I'd like to come out. Can you guide me? Can you give me tips about how to do that? Now we're hearing more and more about psychological distress. Things like violence, being attacked in the street, being attacked on dating apps. These are things that we hear about a lot more today and not so much in the past. So that's the trend we are witnessing. It would seem that we've backslid a great deal. I only have a few seconds left. You noted that Interling is active across the country. Some people may lack physical resources, but still have access to a helpline or a support line. Is that true? Yes.
Sorry. Madame LaRouche, 2 minutes et demi.
Ms. LaRouche with 2.5 minutes. Thank you, Madam Chair. Professor Dupuy-Derry, I seem to be catching some of your pessimism. We spoke about schools earlier. Mr. Vaillancourt, Professor Ganson, I would tell you, I went to visit a school. I spoke to kids at the lunch hour. And then some people told me, oh, you're the status of women critic? There's an increase in violence among our young students. Even at secondary school, boys are trying to control the lives of their girlfriends. I said I set up a LGBT flag and said at the break, we'll talk about this. It was taken down. Diversity flags can't be displayed anymore even. So what do we do about this? We spoke about social media. But as you noted, Mr. Dupuy-Derry, with what's going on south of the border, these bad actors have completely come out of the woodwork. Pornography is getting more violent even. Digital media is taking the space once held by traditional media in society. What can we do? A lot of people ask me, what do we do about boys? But you need to be thinking about girls. Girls are the ones interacting with these boys. So you can't just think, what do we do about the boys? What do we do about the boys? What tools are we giving tools? What tools are we giving girls to deal with these issues? Even dating in high school is being impacted. Boys are out there listening to Andrew Tate. We should focus on the well-being of these girls. Sex ed should start at an earlier age, at a developmentally appropriate age, of course. We also cannot neglect education and never give up. Perfect. That concludes your time.
For 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you for our witnesses for coming today and joining our committee. I've got a few questions, so I'll try to get through as many as I can. I'll start off with Dr. Ganson. Recently, I asked the Minister of Women and Gender Equality to define anti-feminism, and the response I got was, the term may be used contextually in research, consultations, program delivery and evaluation, and monitoring and reporting where appropriate. In your opinion, is this a clear and full definition of anti-feminism?
Can you repeat it just one more time so I can hear it fully?
The term may be used contextually in research, consultations, program delivery and evaluation, and monitoring and reporting where appropriate.
And it doesn't sound like a full definition of anti-feminism. It sounds like the ways in which anti-feminism, the term, could be used, if that's kind of what I'm understanding. I think that our witness Dupree Derry mentioned a pretty wholesome kind of definition of anti-feminism earlier. But I think those different ways in which you are thinking about how we can understand that we should be including anti-feminism into our thinking across those levels, like in research and program evaluation, et cetera.
Okay, and hearing that, if anti-feminism is not clearly defined in government, do you have any ideas what we can do to be measuring? What's the target, and how will Canadians see results so protecting women becomes measurable rather than rhetorical?
I think that's a good question. I think, consensus definition would be a really good place to start so that can be widespread. Then we can create different ways of measuring that within research or, again, programs or policies. So I think, figuring out what that definition is through a consensus process, including researchers, policymakers, advocates, people on the ground, right, individuals, would be a great place to start.
And I was just wondering, can you name a program or an approach that works to protect women without painting boys and men with a broad brush while still holding offenders accountable?
That's a very good question. There is none off the top of my head that I can clearly identify and say, but I think that is an important piece of the puzzle, is not to clearly, broad brush say all men are bad kind of thing. I think, again, as I mentioned in my opening statement, I think if we do that, we then isolate men who can become allies or part of the process to address these issues. I think that's a big challenge to not do that.
Okay. I asked a previous witness, and I'll ask you this. This committee has previously hosted a witness that monetized rhetoric specifically designed to sow division and create conflict. And, quote, "I feel very honored that I can break awful men's brains and apparently careers simply by existing," unquote. Would you agree or disagree that female influencers online who use their platforms to antagonize men and boys and specifically create gender-based conflict, are they doing more harm than good to the cause of feminism?
For women, I think, that would be probably harmful to try and, again, trap people or, get people into situations that are, monetizing themselves or, again, perpetuating narratives that are unhelpful for the greater good. I think that would be a problematic thing for sure.
And I have some time, so I'd like to go over to Monsieur Dupuy Derry. Did I say that correctly? Okay, perfect. You've said that the crisis of masculinity can be used to shut down women's issues, but we're also seeing serious problems hitting men and boys, suicide, homelessness, and kids falling behind in school. How do we acknowledge that reality without letting it derail women's safety? And what happens if we don't? Because if we get that wrong, what's the downstream risk for recruitment into anti-feminist movements?
Unfortunately, I do not have the time to give a full answer. I published an entire chapter on male suicide rates. I noted that this is not the fault of women. The good news is in Quebec in the last few years, suicide prevention efforts for men have intensified, leading to decreased suicide rates. But this is not women's fault. Often anti-feminists blame women for this. For over 100 years,
I just have one quick question that I forgot to ask you is, when young men lash out, is it possible that some of what we're seeing is also a reaction to feeling they're being blamed or their identity is being written off?
The male identity is doing very well. We have many prominent men in our society. The richest men in the country are men. Our political leaders are men. God and the devil are both men. Jesus is a man. We have all sorts of male role models out there. We have no issue with male role models.
And now to the final round of questioning. We have Ms. Khalid, 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for your very engaging testimony today. As I asked in the previous round, it's not just about prevention and education. I think there needs to be an accountability piece as well. As we know that it's not just social media that perpetuates anti-feminist ideology. This is ideology that has existed through the beginning of time as through Adam and Eve, many would say. Professor, I'll start with you, Duboisier, if that's okay. Can you talk about accountability? I know that we just introduced Bill C-16 that holds boys and men to account for their violent acts towards women. And it also goes on to really talk about coercive controlling behavior, online harms, etc. So do you think that that bill goes far enough? Is there other steps that we would take to, while balancing out prevention measures, also hold a stick along with that carrot?
Alors, merci pour la question. Malheureusement, je ne connais pas les...
Thank you for the question. Unfortunately, I don't know the details of that bill, but various researchers in Ottawa and in Quebec have said that the primary question to ask is, do men accept responsibility for their violent acts, or do they seek to avoid responsibility? Here we're talking, we can talk about violent fathers, homelessness, alcoholism. When people do not admit their own responsibility, no progress can be made. Some have proposed resources for violent men. There are resources for men, but they are not encouraged to take responsibility. Often, all too often, they present excuses, and that prevents them from changing. They remain a threat to women.
Thank you for that. And so I will continue that conversation. Then, do you think that there's a systemic, I guess, a culture of letting men escape from holding themselves responsible? You know, like I just used something as an example where we call somebody a rapist, not a raper. You know, like it's very similar to therapist. You know, is that language, is that culture, that creating and coddling of a victimhood amongst men and boys, is that hurting the narrative and the support that women and gender diverse people should receive?
Oui, évidemment, c'est des...
Certainly. These are counter-movements and pushbacks. It must be said, anti-feminism is a reaction to feminism, but feminism is a reaction to sexism. So there was sexism, then feminism, then anti-feminism. There were political struggles to take the upper hand. In recent years, we saw Me Too. Before that, there was the White Ribbon campaign after Polytechnic, which was launched by 3 men. So men have been involved in fighting violence against women through a feminist perspective. That should be kept in mind. Feminists are not all-powerful or all-knowing, but they do understand violence against women better than any other group. We...
1 minute, perfect. Mr. Vaillancourt, would you like to comment on that as well, please?
Je suis 100%.
I 100% agree with what Mr. Dupuy-Derry has just said. All too often, we minimize the importance of this boys' club in society, this culture of silence that allows men to do all sorts of shocking things to women and LGBTQ communities, all while being protected by this cone of silence. There are a lot of men supporting feminism and feminist initiatives. It should be said that they don't always have the lived experience to do so. The same can be said for LGBTQ communities. That said, we do not want to minimize the importance of allies. I hope we can continue to mobilize allies and amplify their voices.
That's the end of our panel for today. I want to thank the witnesses for your contributions. Very well, much appreciated. And for the members, just a couple of things. You see the updated calendar that the clause-by-clause consideration for C-225 is moved to March the 10th to give the legislators time to put the amendments package together. And so the deadline for amendments will be March the 4th at noon. Ms. Khalid.
Thanks, Chair. I'm just wondering, I know that there's agreement, my understanding is that there is agreement amongst parties on this private members bill, and maybe we can move it through our committee a little bit faster than that, and maybe put a deadline as February 20th for amendments to be submitted so that we can have time to work through them and and with the parties instead of waiting till the last minute. If that's okay with you, Chair.
It's really to the will of the committee, but we have witnesses set up to come on both the 12th and the 24th. So do we want to cut off one of those days? Otherwise, you'd be sending in the amendments before you hear the rest of the testimony. Is everybody okay to do that?
And if there are other further amendments based on testimony, I'm sure members can move those amendments from the floor.
Okay, so February 20th for the amendments to be due, and then I'm assuming that you want to finish the clause by clause on the 26th then. Okay, is that good? Everybody in favor of that? Excellent. All right, well with that, that's all for today. I'll adjourn the meeting. Oh, Madame LaRouche.
1 second. The amendments were supposed to be on February 25th. Why would we want to move them back to the 20th? What's the urgency?
This is the suggestion of Ms. Khalid to the will of the committee.
Donc, vous êtes correct avec ça aussi à côté?
And you're fine with this? You're good with that? We would move it from the 25th to the 20th?
Février, oui.
From the 20th to the 20th. On the 26th, we had a meeting set up already.
Is that there has been agreement on amendments. There has already been discussion. And so the idea is that we don't expect to have more amendments come out from the witnesses on the 24th. We think the amendments that have been discussed should be available. So if we get them by the 20th, they can get the legislative package together of the amendments so that we could do the clause by clause on the 26th. Failing that, if the committee doesn't want to do that, it would be March the 10th that we would do the clause by clause. Madame LaRouche.
Pour cette raison-là,
For that reason, I think it makes sense to try and speed up the process. I'm not sure if there's unanimity about that, but okay. TBD, we don't have enough time to get into this now.
Ms. Kelly.
Madame LaRouche needs a little bit more time. I'm happy to make it the 23rd because I do want us to have the package before we go into clause by clause and before we start hearing from witnesses, so we can really tease out what the proposed amendments are looking like with the witnesses.
Okay, let me check with the legislative clerk, and we'll bring that back to the committee at our Monday meeting next, or Tuesday, I guess, next. All right? With that, we'll adjourn.